start just by saying a few introductory words, which is that so it's Karolina.
It's my real name is Karolina.
Okay.
But that's what my mom calls me.
Yeah.
So everyone basically calls me KG.
KG, okay, which I never had, okay. Well, we met up at the gallery earlier this week and had sort of a mini chat about the show. And so what I was hoping that we would do today and what our plan is just to kind of pull out some of the threads of that conversation that we had or that we started. And so we kind of have a map of questions, but that certainly doesn't preclude questions from you all. And, and maybe kind of towards the end, once we've moved into the second room, we can sort of invite it and make it more of a conversation amongst us all as opposed to just us two. So thank you all for coming today. And I wanted to start by asking Karolina to tell us a little bit about your growing up years in the Poconos and sort of what that was like and how that particular geographic context and sort of cultural context framed your relationship with popular culture.
Well, I did. I grew up primarily in the Poconos, although I was born in Poland and moved to the States when I was 5. And not knowing the language and being sort of I was sort of left to my own devices a lot as a kid. I watched a ton of television, and things that I was attracted to were things that didn't need language to communicate. So I really liked theatrical hairband videos on MTV and cartoons, things that were like physically humorous. And when I was 8, we moved to the Poconos, and the Poconos was a very interesting place because it was the honeymoon mecca. So people would from all over honeymoon in the Poconos. So there was a lot of horseback riding and ice skating in the winters and just a ton of resorts. But when airfare became more affordable, people started going to Hawaii. And our economy tanked, and the Poconos was this frozen in time, sort of a rural place. And there were shag carpets everywhere, in the department stores, and there was a lot of sort of gaudy, baroque-ish architecture on these resorts, and we are the inventors of that champagne glass hot tub. So that's where I grew up, and those resorts, opened up to different activities, not necessarily associated with honeymooning, just so they could keep themselves in business. And I became very interested in authenticity because this was actually material from the time it was made. So there were shag rugs from the 70s and wallpaper from that time as well. But then what started happening in the 90s when I grew up was that culture was sort of repackaged and reintroduced to me, like those aesthetics. And MTV started doing rockumentaries on Zeppelin, The Doors. These tie-dye t-shirt shops started popping up. Now every mall has one, certainly, but this was when it started happening. So I remember, I don't know why I was so invested in picking out genuine, actual tie-dye versus finding printed tie-dye, which seems so obscene to me. To take something that, is the result of chaos, as planned as it is, it's rather unpredictable, but people were isolating it, making it an image, and then printing it onto things. And I spent a lot of time in thrift stores too, looking for genuine bell-bottoms, butterfly collar shirts. I wore a lot of polyester. And at that time, there were stores that started producing copies of this. And so the thrift store became this game of finding the genuine article. I didn't want to get the wrong answer, Yeah.
So were you kind of the moment in terms of your other, junior high or high school, I'm not quite sure what period, that were the other kids kind of framing pop culture in this way too, or?
Yeah, we were all wearing bell-bottoms, band t-shirts, replicas of original band
Was there
t-shirts.
irony in that at all? Or, how, there's, there's lots of talk, particularly, I think, kind of in the 90s, of sort of that kind of ironic attitude towards the cultures of the immediate, or relatively immediate past. And I wonder, what kind of attitude did you bring to 70s pop culture and music culture.
The irony question, that's a good question. I was really sincere. Like I still only, like I have a 1981 cutoff for music. I don't know anything past that time. I'm still catching up. So I can't speak for other people, but we were all, you know, that's what we listened to driving around in a very rural place. I would say that for me, maybe a difference was I didn't do drugs in high school or drink. I was a really pretty calm kid. And I felt like my friends associated themselves with these bands and the music because of that lifestyle, whereas for me it was the music and the fashion. Yeah.
Yeah. I think I've always been really interested in that kind of aspect because, you know, Jim Morrison has been a thread in your work for a while.
Mm-hmm.
He has a heavy presence in this show.
Yeah.
But, you know, in lots of previous bodies of work as well. And I've always been fascinated and, you know, and as we discussed earlier, like curious about the fact that he's not of your era. He's kind of closer to mine, and even I'm a little too young to have sort of been in that. But I find it interesting that Morrison and that era of music is kind of a touchstone for you, and yet it's not of your time, and yet it kind of is because again you're growing up, like you know where you grew up was, as you say, sort of frozen in time. And I just think it's so interesting because, you know, as I get older, and I kind of like move away from worrying about like if my musical tastes or pop cultural tastes are cool or not. Like I'm old enough now, like I totally don't give a shit anymore. You know, and it's much more about like unironic, like what if I'm tired, what do I want to listen to? And oddly enough, it's the music from the year I was born in. So it's like, you know what I mean? It's sort of like the stuff that I think is genuinely good is all that late 60s stuff. You know what I mean? Like I don't, you know, and like it's unironic, but then I thought it was interesting. Yeah, it's like it's the music from like that when I was born. Not even my growing up years, but like, you know, what is it about that like pulls us back almost to these kind of primal moments? And again, I think it's particularly interesting with you because it's sort of they're filtered through this kind of I don't know, like a postmodern pastiche of different historical eras, kind of all glommed together, but through sincerity.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it was everywhere.
Yeah.
I grew up in the Poconos, but before then we lived in New Jersey. And New Jersey still, when I go back, I'm amazed the radio station is on. It's not Muzak or any curated musical programming. It's like the morning talk show folks, and then classic rock is the preferred station.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't even know if I had a fighting chance as a kid. Yeah.
Well, so as a way of kind of entering into the specific works in this show, I thought we would talk about this piece, which, you know, in many ways is the touchstone for, in terms of my read of the show, is kind of a touchstone piece, kind of one of the heaviest pieces in a certain way. And you described it to me as a tombstone, though that's not its title. But if you wanted to talk to us about this piece in particular.
Yeah. So about 2 years ago, my dad was diagnosed with cancer, and we had a lot of time to prepare for his passing. And as things kind of started drawing closer to an end, he was making plans, and one of his requests was that he be immediately, what is it called? Cremated, and no funeral. So I thought, well, that's a bit severe, and I wanted to give him some place. You know, this is really the first time I'm dealing with death. So the last time I saw him, he gave me this hoodie, which he wore forever and ever. It's completely sun bleached naturally. This is like, you know, and it didn't feel right to wear it. I think maybe my sort of gut response to material as an artist is like, this is for art. If it's important, it feeds back into the practice. So I started, just by hanging it up on the wall, it seemed completely appropriate as a sort of a object in waiting. And then this text, I actually changed it last time I was at the gallery, so it's his name and his birthday. And then it did say to the present before he passed, but during this exhibition he passed away. So his date of death is here as well. And then this is not yet complete. So I was planning on doing two things. One of them is done. I took part of his ashes and sewed it into the tag here of the hoodie. So he's physically back in his hoodie. And then something, I think this happens a lot when people sort of pass slowly, they lose their ability to drive, and he was a truck driver, and he was just like incapable of sitting in the passenger seat. So when we took his keys away, all hell broke loose. He stopped speaking to my family. You know, he was living with my mother, and we were calling constantly, but all he would say is, "I want my keys, where are my keys?" So my brother is sending them, we sent them to Cincinnati. That's what we have to do, get them out of New Jersey. So he's sending me the keys, and I'm gonna have them bronzed and put them back in the pocket, so. And then it'll be complete. Yeah, and it felt like the right thing to do with this particular garment.
I think that the piece works so well, just sculpturally too, you know, which is, I mean, it's a garment hung, and yet it's just all the elements have sort of come together in this.
Yeah, I think
Magical sounds corny, but I don't know, but in a really lovely way.
Thanks. Yeah, I think I was really nervous to hang a hoodie on the wall because of the politics attached to this particular piece of sportswear.
Right.
So that I kind of took that as a challenge, like, can I do this? Can I make this pretty minimal gesture and take it out of that political arena and make it really personal? So I think text helps, but also just the condition of the cloth, I think, really carries a lot of emotion. And the piece is called Shpi Mawe, which means sleep little one. And it's something my dad used to say to my dog, and he would like press his hand over my dog's face, like to try to force him to go to sleep. That's not really how it works. So I thought that was an appropriate, you know, it became sort of his joke with my dog.
Right.
Yeah.
That's beautiful. Another gesture that, in terms of your making practice, that I noticed as soon as I walked in the room that was different than what I had seen of your work before, was the wrapping.
Yeah.
And I kind of wanted to talk about that.
Well, I'm really attracted to these wire magazine racks as an object that is waiting to be filled with something. And when it's not, it's empty. So I was thinking a lot about Jim Morrison and my father, both alcoholics, and that desire to sort of fill an empty space in yourself. And so using that as a metaphor. But the coiling, it came from a really practical place in that I wanted to treat the surface in some way, but spray painting it, and it just wasn't working. So the coiling is something I took from the wind chimes upstairs. I was coiling these conduit pipes, so they're used to sort of contain electricity, which I like. And I was coiling them because I wanted to mute them in tribute to Jim Morrison's passing, and as well to sort of the end of that band's catalog. So I was like, oh, I can try this out on these objects. And then while I was doing it, it really became about passing every inch of fiber through my fingers and really drawing the outline and the shape of this with my hand. So there became a really intimate processing of these objects and the materials covering them. And then my work is very language-based, so I just wanted to use the word coil and coiling in reference to Jim Morrison and his identity as the Lizard King and his constant referencing to snakes. So there's some dumb jokes in there, and then there's some very sincere moments as well, which I like having it both ways in a single piece. I think it's difficult, and that's the challenge that draws me to continue working in that way. But it also kind of mummifies the object too, and preserves it, and acts like a skin.
I love that your description of being able to, through the coiling or the wrapping, being able to sort of touch every surface of the object. I think that's really incredible. and maybe this is a point where we can kind of look at some of how that gesture plays out in some of the pieces in this room. Sure. So for example, with this piece, like, as with the larger installation upstairs, you have elements that look like they could be wind chimes, but they're wrapped and thus silenced. And yet they're cozied. And so, I mean, I think that too, like sort of the muffling of sound at the same time that you're sort of wrapping them with your touch and through warmth, and of course through color is really evocative and really beautiful. Can you talk a little bit about the structure here, this kind of, I don't even know if it's a footstool or, what the elements are in this piece and,
Sure.
Yeah,
it's a bar cart. So it's a cart that you would push around and offer people drinks from. I was really drawn to the fact that it looks like a walker or like a walking aid. So it speaks to that sort of dependency. And then this is a cast of my finger. And we kind of talked about this in the other room. The work is very 70s, but I always think about it as coming out of the 90s, like I myself did. So I like using objects from my own personal articles from the 90s to sort of counter that 70s look. And these are all the rings that I wore in high school. And especially like these beaded ones, they're just such a throwback to the 70s. It's such a sort of cheap, generic replica. And then the book underneath it is called Riders on the Storm. It's John Densmore's autobiography. My work is very research heavy, and so I have read all the bands, all of the members of the Doors' autobiographies. And John Densmore has really struck me as like a very petty, mean-spirited account of his time with the band. And also, it did a funny thing where the whole book was set up to prove what a great drummer he is and, what a huge contribution he's made to music, but he's constantly giving you what you're really there for, which is stories about Jim. So I found myself like, this poor guy wrote a book, to prevent me from doing exactly what I did, which was like, okay, you got married, very nice, bought a house, great, Jim. And so this was, I wanted to sort of give, John Densmore's still alive, but I wanted to give him an opportunity to make peace with Jim Morrison. So there's a bookmark on page 27, Jim was 27 when he died, and then there's two beads, a peace bead and a frog bead, which is a very dumb, straightforward pointing to Peace Frog, which is a Doors song.
That your work is so language-based in terms of titles, of course, and some of your titles actually read like narratives, like the title for the Tombstone piece, which I can't pronounce it, but I mean, when you read the materials list, it is like a paragraph of narrative. And you have told me before that the way you often think through materials and material choices is it's linguistic in a certain way, and that you're all like the outcome is as much about how your materials list is going to read as it is about the formal aspects of the object itself. And there are a number of kind of really great examples of that here. But do you want to talk a little bit about how you do that, like how you kind of balance the linguistic resonance of materials with the material of the material?
Yeah. It comes from a place where I'm not a drawer, I don't generate images, and I don't necessarily make new things. Maybe this is a direct result of being a 90s kid, I like mashups instead. I like taking stuff and smushing it together to make each smaller part part of a larger narrative. So I guess the closest thing I do have to a drawing practice, though, is like shopping. It's really hard to think this piece up before I find the object and buy it. And I can decide I want, yellow yarn, sure, But when I get to the yarn store, there's so many different types of yellow yarns. Some have like little accent colors in them, you know. So that's where I start drawing from. And to help me make decisions, I read the names of the colors, and sometimes I'll choose something because it has the word, if I'm making work about California, sunset or sunrise, or not in this particular show, but I have a piece which is a replica of Jim Morrison's grave, made in kitchen laminate, so it's a fake grave. And I chose the particular laminate because it was called Mocha Mojo. Yeah, so I bring language into it in that way, and it helps me sort of build out the longer narrative of things.
It's a weird kind of like juxtaposition of chance operation and intent, and like intense intent, right? You know, that you go in looking for you know, whatever the resonance is going to be. You don't know what it is, but it's going to link up to something that you're thinking about, or some kind of, you know, punning sort of operation. But you don't know that you're going to find it, but it seems like invariably you do because you're looking so hard.
Right.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Maybe it helps me stay optimistic as an artist, and like the world is feeding me what I need when I need it.
Yeah.
Thank goodness.
Yeah. Some kind of belief in the cosmic, because your definition of sort of cosmic operations, or whatever that like inspiration is gonna, it will be there if you're kind of, if you open widely enough to it.
Right.
I like this piece too. I think the tiling here is really cool. With the use of the beer bottle caps as tiling elements, and then mixed up with the regular tile, there's you know, it has this kind of Turkish rug kind of quality to it that's really pretty amazing.
Yeah, well, this is really comes from going back to New Jersey and spending time with my parents. It's the only time I watch like cable television. So I watch a lot of home decor and home rehab shows.
Right.
As someone that's very interested in houseware items and domestic aesthetics. And one of the things that they do on these shows is they like give the guy a man cave. You know, they put him in a private room where you can do whatever it is you would do. And a sort of a masculine way of, you know, of taking, like, domesticity comes from such a feminine place a lot of times. So to make it manly, they use like beer caps.
Yeah.
You know, men like beer, put the beer caps on the wall. And it's not good style, you know. It's kind of like, I would say like a decorative faux pas, which I really like to save and rescue things that are bad and ugly. I have that response as an artist. It's like, okay, I want to do something with beer cups that are horrible, but I want to make it work. And it really gives, I think, to this sort of sensation of it being impermanent, whereas the tiles on their own wouldn't do that. And there's like a particular audio associated with like a beer cap falling on the floor or kicking one across the room. And so I like that it has, again, a silent but another audio component like these wind chimes.
Right. And I was just, when you were talking about the sound of a beer bottle or beer can falling, I just realized that I've always thought of those elements as tiles, but I suppose they could be coasters too. Are they tiles?
They're tiles, yeah. I was doing a lot of research on the bathroom Jim Morrison died in, which has been renovated a lot. Because it was a room it used to be a hotel, then it became apartments, and I think it's back to being a hotel now. And I found a lot of online message boards, which are also like not very contemporary, but people are going on and asking. Other people are interested, what kind of tile was in the bathroom when Jim died, and people are speculating, well, in Paris, in this situation, you know, for this quality of a hotel, it would have been this sort of tile. So I spent a lot of time sort of looking for that right tile with another term they use on these home rehab shows is like French Parisian charm.
Yeah.
You know, and just trying to like locate what is that actually, you know, and there's like fake kind of cheap versions of that, and then there's like the real stuff. So I was trying to find a tile that was actually ceramic, and could have been from the 70s, and did sort of speak to some sort of Parisian charm, and then just fuck it up by putting beer bottle caps in it, and messing with that really like beautiful and charming.
Right. So, do you continue to sort of research Jim? I mean, are you still actively sort of researching elements of Jim Morrison's life? Like, is that, you know, you were into it in, you know, when you were young,
Yeah.
but is that like something that you're kind of continually finding new elements of, like, down to the, what was the tile like in the bathroom that you died in? Like, I'm just, this is sort of like more of like a purely, like a curious, you know,
Yeah, constantly. Well, we have the internet now, and when I
so
first...
do you wake up at like 3 in the morning, you can't sleep, and then it's sort of like
Grab
thinking
the
about it?
iPad.
No, really, I mean, we all, I have my 3 a.m. like weird stuff that I obsessively search for. Like, does Jim continue to be this sort of fountain of obsessive curiosity?
Yeah, definitely. I love a good myth. Like, I love a good story, and the idea that he might not be dead is intriguing. The idea that, like, he's not buried there, they just put a fake grave there. And, like, something that the band members all talk about is, like, well, his tomb is too short. He was too tall for that tomb. That's not really how it works. He's not,
right.
You know? So I think what started as reading liner notes in albums, buying vinyl without having a record player just because there were longer stories about the bands, and treating like vinyl covers, like I might as well throw the record itself away, but treating that as like source, as information. And now with the internet, you can actually get so much more. So I'm realizing that I was not satisfied as a teen with what I was given access to. And like, at one point in my bedroom, I had this poster of Jim Morrison, and he was wearing this, there's a black and white picture of him wearing a beaded necklace, and I would stare at this black and white poster and try to figure out what the actual colors of the beads were. And then I went and I bought the beads and I made the necklace, and I was wearing it so proudly, and then someone at school had said, oh, you know, actually it's supposed to be green, not red. And just how jarring that real information was. Mm-hmm. It totally, you know, it disrupted my fantasy of having a necklace just like Jim's. And the piece upstairs is coiled in that color pattern.
I think that's the wildest way to think about an artist's introduction to color theory, right? Like, if you're going to take it completely outside of the realm of academia, and but like that like intense study of like a beloved idol's like color palette, or what, you know what I mean, or like what, and then analyzing color that way, and then also getting at what we all have to think through in terms of color and like what, I don't know what the authentic color as it is in real life, and color as we see it on our screens, right? Always at this juncture, like what is the color really? You know, like it's, you know, that kind of thing. But I think that's so interesting to think about, because your work is so engaged with color, you know?
Yeah.
I mean, maybe less spectacularly in the works here, but certainly in other, you know, other shows that I've seen, that there might be, the colors might be more akin to what your sweater, to the color of your sweater. But I think that's, yeah, I think that's kind of interesting. But I want to just like poke at the Jim thing just one more time, just because it's so psychologically, what is it? You know, so yes, there's the compulsion to research, to dig, to know more, until it does kind of become absurd. The bathroom tile, it's like you've gotten away from your, you know, your, I'm going to use the word idol in a object kind of sense, not, you know what I mean? Okay, so you're getting really far away from the idol then, but like, what is it about Morrison that continues to fascinate you? What is it about you?
Yeah.
That, you know,
I think it's
that's
other
personal.
people's fascination.
Yeah.
I'm amazed that people are still referencing him constantly, and the symbol that he's become over the years. And again, that mystery of whether he is actually dead or whether he's alive. But it's also like, what else am I going to do? you know, with all the, you know, we find ways to fill our time. For me, that's like, I want to look, I want to see as more information comes out. I do like that. I do like that it's like a closed thing as well. Like there are no more Doors albums coming out, and as the band members pass away, that history becomes, for me, it feels more and more solid as time goes by.
So maybe you could kind of talk about Marble, how you're using it, how you're thinking it through, and most obviously, Marble is the material that many tombstones, are made of. Is it that kind of, connection that you're making, or sort of what does it fit to you?
Yeah, I think originally it really came from wanting to make that replica of Jim Morrison's grave and wanting it to be fake.
Which is what this piece is meant to be, that a replica of.
No, this is another piece in another exhibition.
Okay.
But I did recreate it, and then I started thinking, like, again, shopping is my drawing practice, so I'm going to Menards and I'm looking at all of this laminate, and I have to make decisions. So I'm using the names of it, and I really started thinking about how class is attached to decorative material. Granite and marble are so permanent, and they speak to, when applied to home decor, they speak to a certain like class. And I'm sort of thinking about this as like the renter's class. Like when you rent a lot, you live among laminate, and it affects you. Your domestic aesthetic has an effect on you. So I'm thinking about the permanence and the impermanence of things.
Right. How does your, so when you say that the domestic aesthetic has an effect on you, as good or ill, do you think
it depends on what
you like it or aspire to have the real, or it was an interesting phrase that you.
Yeah, I think you watch all these home rehab shows, and the response at the end, the people are just so happy. And yes, they're on TV, so it's going to be a little exaggerated, but I really think that they feel changed and better for having this different backdrop to their lives. I also watch a lot of like true crime television, so Forensic Files, 2020, and I'm interested in the shows that do show the actual crime scene photographs the most, because people are dying in these spaces, and that nightstand is the last thing you're going to see. Or like that carpet is the last thing you felt on your face before you died. And then at the same time, these things remain active after someone dies. Like carpet holds DNA, and so it can be used to solve these mysteries. And I'm interested in the Doors because of the mystery and the myths surrounding the band. And then these true life crimes, kind of, I feel the same way about them. The way that material can continue to hold information about a certain story or a certain person's life. And a lot of these, what I like about this laminate is it's a cover for something else. And a lot of times in these crime stories, they'll revisit the scene, and the place will be rehabbed. So there'll be a hardwood floor, and they'll take it up, and there's something else underneath there. There's a carpet padding that has DNA information on it, things like this. So I'm interested in the covering up of things in a domestic space.
Yeah.
And doing that in a permanent versus an impermanent way.
Which is what you're doing with the wrapping or coiling of material too, where you're actually you're marrying those two materials together. But if the object doesn't have have physical DNA, but like a chip of paint, whatever, like the fabric will retain some kind of memory of it as well.
Yeah, and they're getting covered up, but they're actually getting highlighted. It reminds me of that thing where people will wrap a Christmas gift perfectly, and you'll know that it's a frying pan because it's perfectly. So it's like bad cover up.
That's crazy. Yeah. And so then with the pillow pieces, this is such a amazing presence. It's so amazingly sited in the gallery because it's among the first pieces you see when you walk through the door. And when we were here earlier in the week, I think the light was kind of similar to how it is now. And the mirrored eyes of this of old Ed here were just kind of playing crazy tricks, so that when I was standing across the room, one of the eyes looked like a mirror, and then if I shifted, it looked like a hole that had just been like bored right through, as if I could see through the wall. So it was super cool and creepy, and then the fact that the room, remember when I walked in, I thought there was somebody else in here, because like the kind of echo or whatever, it felt like there was a third person in here. So anyway, but if you could talk, I did not recognize who was depicted on this pillow. So if you could sort of talk about who that guy is and just about the piece in general.
Yeah, sure. This is called City, and it's named after the Ed Ruscha painting that the Art Institute has on display in the modern wing. And this is a portrait out of a book of black and white photographs of Ed Ruscha. So in this one, he has books stacked on his head, and it's jacquard woven, so it's made on a computerized loom. It still has to be woven by hand physically, but the benefits of it are you put a file into a computer, and that computer communicates to the loom, and the loom will pick the strings up exactly as needed independently. And as you weave, you can weave out an image. So you can like scan your face, feed it to the computer, and then the loom will, help you weave it out. So it's a really amazing kind of culture within fiber material studies. And what you would usually do with this amazing piece of equipment that's so expensive and requires a great deal of knowledge to work is you would painstakingly process and render a file, maybe play around with glitch culture a little bit, and then feed it to the loom, and the cloth would be sort of the result of that activity. And I don't know how to do any of that, so I wanted to play with the worst thing you could do to a jacquard loom, which is Google image, take the thumbnail, and email it to someone. In an attempt to get this sort of store-bought, cheap-ish object, when in most cases you would be making an extraordinary textile. And I chose Ed Ruscha because I was trying to think, thinking about Jim Morrison, I was trying to think of other California poets, and he came to mind as having like a nice relationship in that way, but also a nice relationship to Chicago and the place I live with that piece. And then this is, I don't know, it came with a bathing suit that I bought at an American Apparel in LA. So I'm making a lot of work about California, and I got to go there for the first time ever. So I get this bathing suit, and it comes with this extra random long part of the bathing suit. I don't know if this is like decorative or functional, but it definitely reminded me of like the seedier side of California and like the history of high-profile murders, and I don't know, my mind went to like, oh, this is what you bring to the beach, and then you tie someone up with it and you take it away. It seemed like it had that function, but it didn't serve any function for the garment. And then the same with the pillow. It was the same exact process. I Google imaged LA sunrise. This image came up, I sent it to my studio assistant, and he wove it out. And then I find that trim is a really important thing on pillows. And in this case, this is, again, from an American Apparel hoodie. And I'm using that company specifically because they boast that their garments are produced in the States and they're located in LA, and I got to see the factory. And it was a kind of a relief to see that like the workers had taken coat hangers and wedged them to keep the windows open. which, you know, a lot of the places that our garments are produced, you don't have windows too open. So I
Yeah,
thought-
there's plenty of
It's
sweatshop
interesting.
factories in LA.
Oh, yeah, and, yeah.
Just because it's, yeah, anyway.
Yeah, and so being there and seeing all these buildings and then going to, you know, where the stuff is made into their basement and purchasing this stuff. Something I do just out of habit is I always take the hoodie pulls out of my hoodies. And I wanted to take that particular hoodie pull, line this pillow as a way to gesture the idea of what makes a hoodie dangerous versus not dangerous. And I think a lot of it has to do with that particular functional element where you can wear a hoodie and, you know, it can be stylish and practical in keeping you warm, but when you cinch that hoodie as a way to sort of disguise yourself, that becomes a different use of that garment.
You've talked about, we started the conversation talking about your father's hoodie,
Mhm.
and then there's this kind of like element that you're drawing literally from a hoodie that's reoccurring now. Is the hoodie as a garment, as a use of fabric, and as a cultural signifier, is that something you've been thinking about for a while, or is it springing from your father? Where's that coming? Because that seems like, where's that coming from?
Yeah, well, it comes from a text that I read in my knitting class. I teach at the Art Institute, and one of my courses is The Politics of Knitting. And there's a great book by Joanne Turney called The Culture of Knitting. And in it, she goes through talking about hoodies and the potential for using that garment. It's a garment most everybody owns and has and wears regularly. You see them all over the place. But there's been certain events that have made people outlaw hoodies in certain situations. So some malls in America, for a short period, I think this is kind of past, were banning hoodies. You couldn't wear a hoodie into a mall that sells a lot of hoodies.
Right.
So it's like a really sort of a strange relationship with something that has the information attached to it because we're giving it. Yeah. Like a hoodie isn't inherently dangerous. It's whoever's wearing it, but it does have these functional elements that allow you to use it differently depending on what you want to do when you're wearing it.
Right.
Well, and also race.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. And that uncovering kind of gesture, that's also kind of another thread throughout, your use of materials here, and
Yeah.
Well, I had just one more question before we kind of open it up to other people's questions, and that was if you could talk about or explain the title of the show.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
The show is called Tata, and Tata is like this kind of flippant goodbye. It's not a goodbye. It's kind of like, see you later, ta-ta. And tata in Polish is the word for father. So it's tata, tata, like, kind of goodbye, not goodbye. Sometimes I think, like, I'm just making this so I could talk about it later.
It's an interesting thought.
Yeah, like I want to talk about Jim Morrison a lot. Let's do it. This is going to be a nice video. Yeah, because it's a language based, I'm really accountable for every decision that I make. Like, there are no random acts.
Great. Well, thank you all for coming. And again, if you haven't gone upstairs, and if you're able to check out the piece upstairs, please do. It's magnificent.